Hey, it's Irina Pozan, and welcome back to the Career Cravings Podcast. This podcast has a simple mission. It's to help ambitious professionals like you build the career and life that you've been craving. Over the past 15 years, I've worked as an HR leader, designed hiring systems, led recruitment teams, and I've sat on the other side of the hiring table. I've seen what works in today's job market, what doesn't, and what separates those good candidates from the ones that actually land their dream roles. Now I'm bringing everything I've learned straight to you. Each episode is packed with actionable insights and tools to help you land your dream role sooner. Now let's dive in. Welcome back to the Career Cravings Podcast. I am here with David, and I'm so excited for our conversation today all around authenticity in your career, which is a topic that I am getting more and more interested in. I think everyone is. Happiness and just so many other mic drop moments. So David, welcome. I know you are a brand new author, so congratulations on that. And I'm so excited to see all of the work that you're putting out into the world. Maybe you can share a little bit about yourself and how you got into the work that you are doing today.
Absolutely. I call this deep identity work, and, how I got into it is really just by being me, right? We all kind of get into this type of work because when we know that we want to be a better human being, when we know we want to be a better leader, when we know we want to be a better, whatever that it is, partner, husband, brother, I think at that moment we have a choice, right, to go ahead and do the internal work of identity and what my values are and ultimately who I want to be, or we can just let it be and say that's just the way that it is. And I think that I've been fortunate enough, Irina, and I think, we've talked about this before, to have, people around me, my mother and family members who have continued to encourage me to live authentically. And as I've gone through I'll call it the rungs of corporate leadership, I've realized that the more authentic I've become, the more successful I've become. Now, I'll be honest with you, the lonelier I've become as well, right? Because there's a certain amount of authenticity that kind of scares people. So what I wanted to really do, I took a break from, if you will, my corporate ladder climbing about 3 years ago. And what I wanted to really do is understand how we can encourage people to change the complexion of leadership. We know for a fact that the dynamic environment which we work in really doesn't always provide the most awesome environment for some of us. And I think that there's enough research out there to be able to stand up a new framework of leadership. And that framework of leadership really focuses on authenticity. And that's a little bit scary, Irina, because most of us are practiced and well-versed in rewarding others for good performances rather than authenticity. So I think that I was internally driven to try to bring a little bit of my story and experiences to the forefront, but more than anything, to show people that there is a different way, a better way to lead organizations, to lead yourself, and to lead others. So I think that I was really motivated to write a book so others wouldn't have to go through some of the tricky environments and tricky situations that I found myself going through. So
I love that so much. And I think, if we had this conversation 15 years ago or even 10 years ago, I wouldn't have understood. Little Irina, 10 years ago, listening to this podcast episode, may have thought there's no space for me to be my authentic self in my HR corporate entry level or like mid-level kind of place where I was at. But the more I climbed the ladder, similar to you, the more I realized, the more authentic I could be, the better I am at what I do. And I wish that I knew that earlier in my career as well, before kind of getting into leadership. And now I feel like that's what I'm the most passionate about. It's like the more I could be myself through the work that I do, the better it goes and the more it resonates and the message resonates with people. So what would you say to someone who's in that place where they're like, I'd like to be authentic. Like I feel great when I'm authentic with my friends, with my family, but there might not be the place to do that in the office. Like, what would you tell someone who's thinking that as well?
Yeah, that's first and foremost, that fear of being authentic in the office or the workplace. I have to admit, it's natural because we're predisposed to act apart, right? We've been shown in the system that you get rewarded for performance. But I guess I would argue with them that being inauthentic costs you more every time. Even if you're looking for a role or you're in a role, and I think most of us are always looking for that next step, right? The next role, the next chance for impact. And this is kind of how it happens. If what you're doing is looking for that role and you perform your way into that role, 6 months later, the culture and what you're doing doesn't match who you really are. Your leadership says one thing, your brain says another, you're code switching daily, you're exhausted. I think people can this resonates with some people because they're probably feeling it. And then you're 18 months into the new role, into the new position, or 18 more months in the existing role that you've been performing so well in. And, the reality is that you're probably more cynical than you've ever been. And at the end of the day, it's because it's not the right fit. The reality is if you're inauthentic, you'll land more roles, but they'll cost you years and time to ever get that back. You can't get it back. I guess what I would tell listeners is, authenticity really looks like success when you're disciplined to be able to get there. I worked with a professional who was in the final rounds of a director role. And in the last interview, the CEO casually mentioned to her, well, we move fast here, right? Weekends are when the real work gets done. And she paused in that moment, nodded and smiled. And instead of just being silent, she reached inside, grabbed that authenticity and said, I need to be transparent with you. I have 2 young kids. I'm the primary caregiver on the weekends. I'll give you everything during the weekday or work weekdays, but weekends are non-negotiable family time. If that doesn't work for this role, I'd rather know now. And honestly, when she told me the story, I was kind of tight because I was wondering what the CEO would say. And she told me the CEO paused and then said, I respect that, let me think about whether we can structure the role differently. 2 days later, she was offered the job with explicit boundaries around weekend work. And that's been a while. It's been almost 3 years. And she's thriving now. And the entire organization has changed their leadership team's approach to work-life integration because she had the courage to be honest. So I guess, to recap it, fear of being authentic is natural because pointing all my fingers at me, I've been rewarded for playing the role and everybody sees that. You get title, you get position, you get dollars, but being authentic doesn't close doors. I've found that it opens the right ones and closes the wrong ones for you before you waste that time walking in and spending years trying to figure it out. So my feeling and my courageous statement to people is authenticity isn't the risk. It's actually the filter. The goal isn't to get every job. And the goal isn't to get everything you position for. The goal is to get the right one that aligns to who you are. So risk is real. The reward is much greater.
Yes, totally agree. I love that she had the courage to do that because in my mind, as you were saying it, I'm like, well, she just lost that opportunity because we know what the CEO wanted to hear, right?
Yep.
Like, oh, are you like us? Do you fit in here? Are you going to also, like me, spend all weekend working? And the answer was no. And you know what? Now that I think of it, she had nothing to lose because really she would have had to, even if she got the offer extended, if she wasn't authentic, she'd probably have to either turn it down or if those expectations weren't set, she'd either be terminated really for not doing what was expected or would feel the pressure to have to leave. So I know that's a very privileged place to be because a lot of people will say, well, I just need any job. I need different income. And there's different times that is more appropriate, right? Where we're just looking for safety or security or fulfillment and authenticity. And like that is a totally different, higher level need. I'm curious for you, David, what that looked like. I know there's a lot of pressure of like wearing a mask at work and like saying all the right things that people want to hear. Like, yes, I'm like you. It's like a human nature thing where to survive in the past, we had to be like our tribe, right? Or else, like if we're rejected by the tribe, we're going to die. So at work, we're just like, yep, I'm like you. I wear the same suit and I talk like you and I just look like you. So what did it look like when you were starting to feel like the tension of not being as authentic as you are today? What did that look like? Like, what were the negatives of doing that for you?
Yeah, I think that, the first is, getting over the fear of the vulnerability, right? I think the first thing that I started to really feel, and again, we condition ourselves, you and I have talked about, our backgrounds, and some of us are treated like others from the time that, we're born. And I think that I learned early on that being an other, not fitting into the cultural fit, the slow degradation of culture fit, that it had impact on me as a human being. So I started to adjust and to change and all those things. And to your point, at some point, as I look back in my life, there were moments that I said, this just doesn't feel right. And I remember one moment specifically where I was being interviewed by a production company, and the company I was working for was putting together this video montage that they wanted to share with the world. And they came to me and they said, hey, speak about this one thing. Well, this one thing wasn't necessarily real. It was something our CEO had said. It was something that, the CEO was trying to press on the organization. And I saw it a different way. And literally, I told this, vice president, now the chief marketing officer of the organization, I told him, I'm not going to talk about that because it doesn't feel real to me. I will talk about, and then I ended up talking about the culture that the organization had developed, the tapestry, not the family, but the tapestry woven together for strength and for coverage and the beauty that the tapestry brought. And honestly, in that moment, I was concerned that the CEO would come down on me with 2 feet because I know the CEO wanted that spoken. But in that moment, I knew that the right thing to do was to describe the culture based upon what the employees had talked about and what they had transparently shared with me, and the value that it brought to both the members that were the customers and to the employees. And interestingly enough, that paid off well because it's another story, but they ended up using the video montage for the organizational public offering. And there I was, this young kid, well, not young kid anymore, but at the time in my mind, I was still this young kid of color from rural Iowa. And here I was with my image projected up against the New York Stock Exchange on Broad and Wall. And my voice was booming down Broad Street and Wall Street, talking about this tapestry of culture. That wasn't out of rebellion. That wasn't because I didn't like the CEO, love the CEO. I think you do have to have rebellion from time to time, but it was because what I wanted to do was authentically describe what I had seen from my perspective, and it was rewarded. And I think, honestly, there's a perfect story of doing what you know is the right thing to do, even when people are watching, and it's coming out. I had friends from New York City saying, hey, man, I think I just saw your picture on the side of the New York Stock Exchange. And I was like, wow. And so, yeah, I got over the fear of not being authentic. I was authentic. And so it's really just tamping down that fear. And then the last thing I should tell people is it's practice. I didn't wake up one morning and all of a sudden I was authentic. When I knew I needed to make a bigger change to bring more authenticity into the workplace, that's when, if you will, the research to the book that I wrote really started to kick in. And I started to ask myself, what are the internal attributes and the external behaviors of authenticity, and how can I demonstrate them more? And I started to practice. And just like anything, without practice, you're not great at it, right? And so many people won't do something unless they're great at it. Well, then I'd say practice. And if you have to practice privately in your room, then do that. But don't prevent yourself from being more authentic, because it actually is super rewarding just because you think somebody else is not going to like it. Give them a chance, right? Give people around you a chance to see the true you. You may have to change some of the people around you, but again, it's so rewarding when you can align who you are with your actions and your behaviors without that membrane between home and work. So
yeah,
I'd say get over the fear, right? Practice it because it'll get you there. And then keep your eyes and ears open for when the rewards start to happen, because people aren't running up to you saying that they love the fact that you're more authentic, but you will see and feel people coming to you for more leadership as you do so.
Completely agree. And there's so much mental space that's used when we're one way here and another way here slightly, trying to sort of like people please. So in your work, I know you talked about all of the research that went into the book. You talk about career transition as a leadership identity crisis. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think first and foremost, it's important to call out that most of us, again, pointing all my fingers at myself, most of us don't realize that we've built our entire identity around performing a role until the role disappears, right? We say things like, I'm a vice president of marketing, I'm a senior engineer, and that's not identity work, right? Those are job titles. And I think it's so easy to get caught up in the job title. So here's what I know. We're all leaders, right? A leader of self, leader of others, leader of organizations. And we shy away from leadership sometimes because we don't always see ourselves as leading ourselves through transitions. And career transitions actually force you to confront that. When the job ends, layoff, burnout, restructuring, whatever it is, suddenly you're asked, who am I when nobody's watching? What do I really actually value and what work energizes me versus drains me? Those aren't job search questions. Those are leadership questions, right? Let me give you an example. I worked with the VP of operations who spent 15 years climbing. I'm telling you what, great resume, every metric met, and then she got laid off. And she told me, I realized I hate operations. We did some inner clarity work together, which is the first component of Authentic Blueprint. And we asked the questions around what energizes you. And she said, teaching people, building processes, watching breakthrough moments, right? And then I asked, the simple question of what drains you. And she talked about reporting up and defending budgets and playing politics. And the reality is in that conversation, all of a sudden she said to me, I don't think I ever was a vice president of operations. And we kept talking about it. And what we found out was that she was a learning and development leader trapped in the wrong role for about 15 years, getting rewarded for the costume that she was wearing and doing it well because she was a motivated person and wanted to be seen as successful. So in that moment, she said, well, what would it look like if I started to do some L&D job searching? She did more learning and development job searching, and she even considered lateral moves, which again is taboo, right? You have to keep climbing the ladder. Within 6 months, she landed like her job, right? Not a job, but her job, where she said she finally felt like herself at work. And I think that's the difference. Career transition forces identity questions. And if you skip it, if you just spend your time polishing your resume, practicing your answers and applying everywhere, well, that's not going to lead to you saying out loud, this is the job that I love. It's going to lead to you looking for another job in another 18 months from now. So I'd say that, I call it leadership identity work because this is your opportunity to find out what type of leader that you already are and need to be better at. Because if your leadership only works when things are stable, your leadership's already broken. Career transition is where you can build something real. That's why I call it that. And at the end of the day, if we spend that time reflecting, thinking, and really observing what type of leader we want to be, I've seen it time and time again that people come out with the role that they love, not just a role.
I love that. And I think at the end of the day, that's what we all really want. But the truth is, if we're laid off or something happens and it's unexpected, the quick fix is skipping it, like you said, skipping all the reflection and just going straight into, okay, if I need to be employed in the next 12 weeks, the easiest job to get is the one I already had with the same title or my boss's job, and continue to just climb up the ladder. And I have personally come to the point where at a point that stopped being very fulfilling, and I had to take a step back and do exactly what you're talking about. Understand what lit me up the most in what I did, what I wanted to do more of, what I wanted to never do again or do less of. And it's incredible when you do have experiences and you've spent years working, you know what you like and what you don't like so much clearer than when you did at 18, when you made the career decision, that like your frontal lobe wasn't even developed and then you just like randomly picked something. And then now 10 years later, you're sitting there and you're like, oh, wait, like this doesn't feel like I thought it would. Like what is next? So love that. Now, this what we're talking about right now, it seems like it's coming up in the world of work a lot lately.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I think that, well, let me step back. I call the era that we're in right now the quantum workforce era. And I do so not just because there's a lot going on, but I do so because every person inside of our system right now, everybody who's trying to work and trying to get things taken care of, we're all inside of this quantum system as well, right? And we're quantum too, right? We're caregivers and an executive. We're physically present and virtually expected. We're making 1,400 decisions a day with hundreds of them from, organizational chart that was never accounted for. We feel tension constantly between all the versions of ourselves when we're performing roles and the one that's actually true. So first and foremost, we as human beings are asked to be quantum beings. And that's not easy. That's being two places, three places like the Cheshire Cat. That's not easy. Then on top of that, we've got 5 forces impacting us and accelerating tension simultaneously. We've got demographic plurality where we have changing demographics. We have 5 generations. We have nobody who really has a shared playbook. We've got a credibility crisis that's happening for us. We know that the Edelman Trust Barometer tells us that only 46, I think, % of employees trust their leaders to tell the truth to them. We've got talent mobility where we know that, 2/3 of all millennials and Gen Z are planning to leave their job within 4 to 5 years. We've got digital transparency where every decision that you make as a leader is posted on Twitter or on Instagram within minutes, and Glassdoor has the evals within 72 hours. And then, of course, there's this wonderful thing called AI, and AI is accelerating things faster than, you and I can really even process. The reality is that we are being crushed like no other time in the history of humankind. And so I think that the professionals who are not just surviving, but they're thriving in this super dynamic environment, this quantum workforce era, they've already done the identity work. The ones who struggle right now, honestly, are still trying to sound qualified while hiring managers are actually looking for what's aligned. So there's just so much going on. We've got the 5 forces going on. People are asked to be in multiple places at the same time. So I totally understand how difficult that it can be when somebody like me says, take the time to do the identity work, right? That just means more time and more practice. But I think that the one thing we have to remember with all of the chaos and the cacophony of decisions and sounds around us, I think one of the things we have to remember is, do I want this feeling of anxiety and being sped up for the rest of my career? Or do I want to get it more aligned to who I am and what I want to be? And that, if that's the case, then let's slow down a little bit. If that's the case, let's do the identity work. And if that's the case, let's find how we can get into the flow of the quantum workforce era instead of fighting the forces that are impacting us daily.
Completely agree. And I think most people listening would say, no, that's me. Like, I want to do the work. I understand why it would be valuable. But I think a lot of people have resistance in believing that they can land a role that would feel fulfilling, that is more aligned to who they truly are, that they would really be accepted. Maybe they've never tried to do this thing before. So if someone is feeling stuck right now and they're like, yeah, that sounds like the right thing. Like, of course, I want to be more fulfilled. Of course, I want a job that's aligned to who I truly am. And I know something's off. What's the first thing that they should do when they're pausing and reflecting on what happens next?
I think that, this is where it gets a little bit tricky, right? Because we've talked about a little bit, internal identity work, the identity work that we have to do to become better leaders, to become better human beings, actually requires you to be focused on that development process. So I'm going to say something that, your audience is probably going to say, what are you talking about, David? I'd say that the first thing that you need to do is stop applying to jobs for the next 48 hours. I know that sounds crazy and it's not realistic because it feels impossible when you're in crisis mode, right? When the mortgage is due and severance is running out. But activity without direction, well, that just burns energy and it doesn't build any energy for you. And so you're feeling this busy and you're feeling exhausted and you're feeling like you're stuck. Well, you've got to, since we can't create time, right? You have to take time. So I would ask you to do the same thing as step number 1 in this 48-hour pause period. I'd ask you to, with a pencil and paper, and maybe it's a pen and paper because something shifts when pencil meets paper. I would ask you to first answer this question. Write it down now, actually. Write this question down. Who am I when nobody's watching? Not who your organization needs you to be, not who you got rewarded for, not who your parents wanted you to be, not the version of yourself that sounds impressive on LinkedIn. None of that really is impactful to this question. Who am I when nobody's watching? And I think as you do that and you think about just you and you're honest, not trying to be impressive, honest, that's when the inner clarity actually starts. And as the first component of the Authentic Blueprint, that's where I ask everyone to start, right? Is who am I when nobody's watching? I ask them to do 2 more questions, and you've already heard me talk to you about one of them, which is what work energizes me versus drains me, right? And you have to make 2 lists, right? Energizes and drains, and you have to be brutally honest on these lists because we're so conditioned to make it sound good to even ourselves about our career that we need you to be that individual that's only writing down what's actually true. And I think the best way to think about that is what do you feel like at the end of the workday or at the end of the work week, right? What energized you today or what energized you this week? And then the final question that I'd ask people to ask, I know you said, what's the first thing to do? And I'm giving you 3, but.
No, I love it. I was going to ask more. Like what next?
I think then again, in the attribute work from the Authentic Blueprint, I think that you have to ask yourself, what are my guiding principles? In other words, what values are non-negotiable in my next role? And don't give me that hooey about, I just want a good culture. That's meaningless, right? What's important is what specific values you truly want. Is it transparency? Is it autonomy? Is it growth? Is it impact? Write them down. I think these 3 questions really help us start the identity work that we have to do. And this is how you figure out who you are as a leader without a title. I think most people, we talked about this a little bit earlier, but most people skip this process and jump right into tactics, right? How do I explain my gap, right? How do I answer behavioral questions? What's the best sequencing for me to present to them? But honestly, Irina, I don't think you can interview authentically until you truly know who you are. You can't assess alignment until you define your guiding principles. And my book, Pirate Jokes Aren't Funny, which is now live at piratejokesarentfunny.com, in chapter 2, the book walks you through this inner clarity with frameworks and an actual practice that over 5 days you can start the identity question right now. So I'd say that first, stop just applying and being busy. Second, ask yourself those 3 questions. And then third, stop leading like them. Start leading like yourself. And I think those are the things that I would encourage a person to try if they're willing to lean into trying to be authentic as a leader.
I love that. There's such a dopamine hit with doing, checklist. I applied to 20 roles today and I fixed my resume and I did this and I practiced for the interview and I know what they're going to ask me and check. And then your brain is like, ooh, I'm so productive. And then you do end up landing the role, but without the reflection, what I've learned is I've helped clients land those roles really quickly. It's what I do. But then they'll come back and they're like, I'm ready for my next role. And I'm like, it hasn't even been a year yet. And like, great for business, but like, hold on, what was missing? What do you want more of? What's next? How do we get more clear? And that is a big gap. There will be consequences if you're fixing on that short term, gotta do. And you're right. There is a huge payoff to actually knowing who you are authentically, because then when people ask you about your strengths, which you're going to be asked, because it's like a terrible question, but you'll be asked, you'll like actually know what those things are in a way where they're aligned to the role. Or when you're asked like, why do you want to work here? You'll really be clear on like, well, this is exactly why, because you've done that inner reflection. And then I think after you land it, you have a better chance of being fulfilled for the longer term because you actually did the work to get clear on what you wanted in the first place.
Yeah.
And
You
like,
you nailed it. I mean, I think until people experience that, we sell ourselves short and go for that short-term win. And I think
yeah,
one of the things you talk about the dopamine with 20 application in that, but at night you're laying there and you've got all this cortisol building up because you've applied to 20 and you're not even sure that you necessarily like all 20, but you're still wondering if all 20 are going to come back to you, right?
but it's the
And
goal. Gotta get it now. It's so true. And like, I think I'm so passionate on this topic along with you because like I've done it both ways in my career. And like, for example, my first role, I wasn't even sure that I wanted to get into HR, but like I did all the education. It was advice that was given to me. And I'm like, sure, I'll just do that. And then I landed the role and I would like cry on the way home from the office a lot.
yeah,
And then I'm like, well, what do I not like? And then had to reflect. And then I had to make another goal. Okay, for the next role, what do I need less of now that I have more information? What do I want more of? And then slowly get to a place where I truly loved what I was doing. And that was much more fulfilling. But I love your reflection. I think it could be done every year.
absolutely.
Like you don't have
Absolutely.
to be pivoting every year, but you need to know what you want more and less of. And even in your same role, like say you identify you love like your T&D example of
Yeah.
the VP of operations, like, well, she figured out she loved training. Even in her own role before she moved into a different role, she could have probably been doing more of that and it would have been great for the organization, but she wouldn't have known to even ask for that if she wasn't clear. So I think we could do this every year.
I couldn't agree more with you. I think that the identity work is something that should be done before, after, and during transition. I think that it's something that, especially, I'll call it in this dynamic quantum workforce era where things change so quickly, it's what allows us to stay guided on the path that we're on by reminding ourselves what our guiding principles are. What is truly my inner clarity? How do I develop and show you this trust-based and trust-built transparency that I know that quality, authentic leaders engender for psychological safety? There's so much work that we can be doing in all three stages, the before transition, after transition, and during transition. But I'll be honest, most people don't want to do them. Some people do it in crisis, but most people don't want to do it because it's work. You have to actually schedule it. And you have to put some time in. And that's where I would challenge people is, again, take time, since we can't make it, take time to practice and to take the time to do this deep identity work, because it's not just fulfilling in the sense that, wow, I feel better about knowing myself. It translates into more joy and more happiness in the workplace for you every day.
Every day. And we spend so much time there. We might as well enjoy it, right? Might as well enjoy it. Okay. I love that. And you mentioned where people can go to get more tools. And I'm curious, I know you have a strong take on the age-old advice, a couple of things, but age-old advice, fake it till you make it. I'm curious to hear what that is.
We do hear that a lot, right? And we all love watching the TED Talk on it. And then, we go stand in our power poses and all that's actually wonderful because it does work for skills. It doesn't work for identity. You can fake confidence and excel until you've learned Excel. You can fake understanding of a new system until you actually understand it. That's called learning, right? And that's appropriate. What you can't fake and what people smell is inauthenticity. You can't fake authentic leadership. People detect it immediately, and especially in the environment that we're in now. So here's the problem with fake it till you make it, especially in career transitions, right? You perform your way into the job. Hey, you got jazz hands, right? And you said everything that you wanted to say because you know they wanted you to or wanted to hear it. You projected confidence. You didn't feel any, but you projected it. And then you got hired for a performance that you can't sustain. How do you show up every day in a job to perform instead of being, right? 6 months later, you just talk me through this. 6 months later, you're miserable. The job doesn't align with your values. You're code switching daily. You're exhausted from performing, and you realize I'm trapped in another role that's slowly hollowing me out. So I don't want people 18 months later to have to start to do the climb out of the bottom again, right? I don't want them to have to go back into career transition, right? I want them to actually do the practice now. Now we can, if you will, think about how we can streamline ourselves, not our resume. We don't need more complexity in our resume. We don't need more cynicism over alignment. What we need is the energy retained so we can show up to be the best leader and best self that we can be. And the way that we retain that energy is to close that gap between who we say we are and who we are, right? And when we do that, it's pretty darn amazing. I teach, build it before you need it, right? Do the identity work before the interview. Know your guiding principles before you negotiate. Understand your actual value before you try to project confidence. Faking it can be seen. Faking it is truly faking it. Confidence isn't performed, it's real. And you get to that point of confidence by actually building the capacity underneath it. And I talk about this in chapter 7 that focuses on activated growth, how you build learning capacity that doesn't depend on faking it, right? We use different tools like failure reports and document stacks and reflection cadences. But I think the key is you have to learn to metabolize where you failed, ultimately what wisdom you've built. And then you have to be able to say, I'm done wearing the mask, because the mask you wore yesterday, it won't work tomorrow, right? Digital transparency exposes performance. Demographic plurality means you're evaluated by people who, can detect filtered content in milliseconds. And interview processes today are specifically designed to catch that gap between what you say you are and who you are. So I would say in the quantum workforce era, don't try it. I mean, you can fake it, again, back to then skill development. That's learning. But I'd say stop faking, start building, do the identity work that makes authentic leadership your default mode. Faking gets you hired, building gets you the right job. And there's a meaningful difference between those two outcomes.
Completely agree. I think we can be in that end state that you're describing. Everything is easier. It takes zero effort to be yourself or to do the things you're truly great at or the things that light you up. It takes a lot less effort than to do those things that we push off that we're like, oh, I have to do payroll again, or I have to do, this thing I don't enjoy. And then what happens is you want to spend more time doing it. So you're building, it's like that 10,000 hour rule. Then you're building more and more capability. And then, so it's easier, and then you're getting better at it. And then you will ultimately be rewarded for that if those two things are happening, and it's less effort. So it's like a win-win-win for everyone, right? For like all sides.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. David, this was such a great conversation. Any final thoughts that you would leave our listeners with if they want to go deeper, and where can they connect with you?
Well, one, thank you so much for being an incredible host today. As we ran up to this and got a chance to get to know one another, right? We've had some parallels in our careers, right? And both of us come from an other background, right? I'm an adoptee from a rural Midwest, and you've made your way to this side of the pond from a war-torn country, and ultimately both of us were put into systems that necessarily weren't built for us. But as the two of us are talking and people are listening to us, be not afraid, right? Because the reality is that the more you align yourself to authenticity, the more fulfilling your work and your life can become. And that's just like anything in life. It takes time, work, and energy into it. I would say have no fear, right? Today is the day, and we have an opportunity to change the course and the direction of how we lead and how we show up every single day. And we might as well capitalize on that today. I'd love it if people can get in touch with us, right? We're on tour right now, right? We're going to be in a few different cities. We're going to cross the United States. You can find that on our website on authentara.com. We're touring and celebrating authentic leadership across America. You can come to our website and explore our programs. We've got some pretty darn awesome programs there, assessments. We've got a 40-day self-guided program. We've got a certification that's SHRM and PMI CEU eligible that has a cohort starting in the summer of 2026. So there's lots of ways to connect with us, but I would say just check the book out, right? Start there, because it's going to challenge you to think about who and how you lead. This isn't necessarily a motivational book. You're not going to be jumping up and down afterwards saying, I'm so motivated to do something. but it is a book that gives you a blueprint and a framework to develop your authentic self to the highest degree that you can. So interact with us, because this is a movement. This is a movement. This isn't just a book. This is the beginning of a movement that we know we need higher quality leadership, that we need more authentic leadership, that we need to create the environments where the psychological safety is built in so we can bring our best self to work, because that's when we're the most productive. That's when we're retained the most. And ultimately, that's when we give the best experience to both our coworkers and to our clients. So I just want to ask, which is, contact us, talk to me, let me know about your authentic journey, because I'm truly interested.
I love that. And I know this content is going to resonate with so many people. So reach out to David. I will link all your information as well. Send it to me, by the way. I'll link it in the show notes for listeners to get in contact with you. And I can't wait I hope you come to Toronto, or I hope our paths cross at some point. I'd love to be part of it as well. And this is so much a message that needs to be shared. So I'm so glad that you were here today, and so beautifully said. Thank you so much, David.
Thank you. Honored to be here. Thank you for your time. Bye-bye.
Hey, before you go, if you've enjoyed listening to today's show, I would love your support. Please take a moment to leave a review anywhere where you listen to podcasts. And here's the exciting part. I'm running a special contest and giving away a one-on-one session with yours truly. All you have to do is leave a review, take a screenshot, and send it to me in my DMs. All of my contact info is in the show notes. I appreciate you so much, and I cannot wait to build the career and life that you've been craving together. See you next week.